All right. So today's topic is from tense to productive, a manager's blueprint for tough conversations. Paul, you and I were just talking a moment ago before we went live about how we have a tool that helps us, like we use it ourselves to have those conversations we would otherwise avoid. Doing your prep work, doing your homework, so to speak, makes it a lot easier to get into that conversation that I know I sometimes wish, like, can't someone else do this? Like, can't someone else be the grown up, the adult, like give them the feedback I don't want to say? But given our roles, often as leaders, and especially if you're a manager in an organization, you are the one that people are looking to address these conversations. So let's talk about we had a role play recently in our class where we first introduced this. Tell us a bit about the scenario that we used, Paul.
This is a scenario that we kind of use to ease people into having hard conversations because we know it's a thing managers need to do on a regular basis. And what makes a conversation hard for you is not the same as what makes it hard for somebody else. But a common situation that we find people have difficulty doing is when someone is not meeting expectations in terms of performance. There's some impact to that, and as a manager, you need to figure out what's going on, provide some feedback, take corrective action, right? And so we have a scenario that we introduce, early on with a manager and a direct report, and the direct report has missed some deadlines on a really important project, and there's some quality issues, and so that managers kind of coming in to have this conversation and figure out what's going on, what are we going to do about it, and set things right. And so we when we introduce this, we play these two parts to introduce this, and we don't do it well.
We do it in like the very typical underprepared way that a manager might have this conversation of, I know I've scheduled the time with my direct report, so I at least have some sense of this is the thing that we need to talk about today, but I have not done any other thinking about how am I going to communicate this? Like, what do I need to say? Like what questions do I need to ask? So actually, as like the manager role last week, I kicked it off with like, hey, employee, like, so how do you think that project is going? Because in my head, I know it has not been going well. We've missed some deadlines. And I'm thinking if the employee can like ease into the, like, I also acknowledge things are not going well. Whew, that's a load off my shoulders. It's so much easier to talk about, like, how did we get here? How do we not continue down this path? Like what needs to change? But often the employee, like Paul played it last week, is like, yeah, no, I think we're past the hard part. Everything's great now. And you're like, oh no, there went my opening. So really the first part of the homework is this question of what is your goal for the conversation? And when you come in underprepared or hoping I'll ask the clever question to the other person and they'll name the topic that's in my head, you might be setting yourself up for a much more difficult conversation than it needs to be. So spend time thinking about what do I need to achieve? What do we both need to be walking away from this conversation aware of and committed to doing is super helpful.
Yeah. And this is part of, the tool that we walk through people with is like, you're going in to have this conversation. Why are you having it? Like, what's sometimes there's this thing about like, what happens if I continue to avoid having this conversation? But it's like, what's the thing that needs to happen? And that needs to be the thing that steers you in the conversation. So yes, you might come in hoping that, you're going to ask me, how's it going? And I'm going to go, I'm really sorry I missed those deadlines. That I'm going to do the hard work of admitting of seeing the problem, of admitting it, of telling you what I'm going to do in order to address it in the future. I mean, here's the thing. If you're hoping that I do that, you at least know that getting to somewhere on that is the goal of the conversation. Right?
True.
You've unearthed that, right? You're just hoping that you don't have to do it.
Right.
but it is the thing where it's like, when you've got the goal in mind, it's a thing that allows you in the conversation to be thinking about, are we actually moving towards that or not, right? And if we're not, how do I bring it back? How do I steer it towards that? And you may have multiple goals. I mean, we do almost always talk about the fact that you probably have a work-related goal. This is a task that needs to get accomplished, and a relationship goal. It's like, how do we accomplish that task in a way that builds our working relationship so that we're more able to work together better in the future? But like in this conversation, one of the things that was pretty clear is that one of the goals that that the manager has is to communicate pretty clearly to the employee that this level of performance is not acceptable, and if you don't, if things don't change, your job may not be secure.
Right.
And and the fun part is the question, we debrief this with the students, right? They watch us, and then we ask them some questions about what we're doing. We have them give us feedback on the feedback giving part. And we ask this question at the end, which is super fun, which is, how close do you think this employee is to getting fired? Like, scale of 1 to 10, where do you think they are on this?
And I think we got like the clearest answer last week when it was like, well, from the employee's perspective, like a 4, but manager 7.
Right.
And that's why, when we talk about like, how do you prepare for this? Like, first question is like, what is your goal for the conversation? But the next one is, and so what do you want to be clear about? Because when you have spent the time meeting with this person and you're at 7, I am about to like start up the paperwork for a PIP if this continues for another couple weeks. And the employee's at 4, like, yeah, we're past the hard part. I'm in a good place now. No big deal. That gap is very, very telling. And so spending a little bit more thought on, what do you want to be clear about? What do you need to hear from them to tell you you have been that clear? You're both at 7 at this point. You both know exactly where you stand.
Yeah. And we've talked before about, about the importance of being clear, curious, and connected. And those are the 3 things we want to think about. And the first of that is clear, right? What is in your head that needs to be in their head by the end of the conversation, right? What's the information you need to share? You need to know that that information has been received and acknowledged, that you both have enough of a shared picture of what that looks like. That's really the goal of being clear, is to make sure that you're both coming away with something that currently only you have in your head. Of course, the other side of that is, what do you need to get curious about? Like, what's in their head that needs to be in yours by the end of that conversation? What do you need to learn from them? Right. And so that can be things like, in the situation we're talking about, it's like, what's behind why these deadlines have been missed, or what's going on with the, that we could do something about. Like, how can I actually, as the manager, support you to, to change this? Like, what, or where is your confusion about the fact that this is a top priority? Like, where do you think this falls on your priority list?
Right.
Like, those are all things that I might need to get curious about.
Yeah. And this was where like our students then, have an opportunity. They pair up, they get to practice after they've spent some time going through this blueprint that we're going to make available to you. And when they dialed in their curiosity, they started to hear from the employee, who's a high performer typically. That's why they're on their number 1 priority project for your team. They've been responding to requests for help. They've been trying to, get other people onboarded onto the team and, let other people, be able to function in their jobs. Because they're the high performer, they have all this institutional knowledge, and they've been spending their time working with other people and sharing it. And that's what's taken them away from the project. So when you start to hear that as a manager, and you're able to, again, figure out, so how do we navigate this differently? Because I can't have you continue to get pulled off for all these other things. I'm going to come up with a different solution of how those other people's needs get addressed. And literally, here's what I need you to say when they come to you for that. So, getting into the curiosity then made it, I think, more apparent, like, what is the connection now? Like, all right, so now I see where you're coming from and what's been going on. there was other expectations I must not have made clear enough, right? I did not support you in like creating the right feedback loops for other people of how they could get their requests or like their needs handled. So I'll work on that. Here's what that looks like. Here's what I need from you to help reinforce that if they come to you. And do we continue to feel like we both understand we're at 7, but here's how we're moving forward productively, so that we don't suddenly move to 10 and someone loses their job.
Right. And the connected piece really is the, like, particularly when you're addressing a difficult conversation or a difficult topic, right? The idea of the other person feeling connected with you is that they know you're in there with them, right? That you not only know what's going on with them, but you care about that, in an appropriate way, right? So it's like in the situation where, you're giving me feedback that I'm not meeting these expectations. It's both that I understand what those expectations are, and I feel heard in the sense of like, you now understand the situation that I'm in, and that I feel like you actually want me to succeed. Like, particularly in these feedback conversations, like, you have to be both the clear and connected pieces are I need someone to be doing this job well. That's the clear part. I want it to be you. I want you to succeed. That's the connected part. And it needs to be somebody. And so it's like, we kind of feel like, oftentimes we feel like we don't want to be clear because we're afraid of being harsh. So the connected piece is, how do we make sure that message comes through clearly, but not harshly? That people understand we're saying this thing because we actually have their interests in mind here, that we do want to support them. That we're not just going, you need to figure this out, good luck, right? Right? Because that's kind of the way through these hard conversations. This is the place where, when we talk about, those two earlier pieces, clear and curious, are about making sure that there's good information flow back and forth. This is, and that's really about how we're going to move forward with the work. This is about how we're going to do the work in a way that maintains and builds the relationship. We have a difficulty to work through, but we're actually in this together,
right?
Rather than just going, you need to figure it out.
So we've touched on asking yourself those questions about what do you need to be clear about, what do you need to be curious about, and how do you stay connected. And it's really not enough to then like try to tell yourself throughout the conversation, like, just be clear, be connected, be curious. Like if that was your mantra throughout, it would still be kind of muddled and I think difficult to navigate that tough conversation. So the last part of the homework, this prep suggest people do using our blueprint, is really get specific. What do you need to do? What is it that is going to set you up in order to be clear, connected, and curious? So being very specific, what do you need to do? What do you need to say? And maybe it is like this boomerang phrase that you actually say it a couple of times in the conversation. If it starts to move to these like other things that you didn't really want to get into, like, whoa, like bringing it back to like, we're here. This is what we need to focus on. So what do you need to say? And certainly, what do you need to ask? What is the information that they have that can be helpful for you to also have? And especially when you have said, here's where we are, when you can ask a question and have them give their version back to you. It's a way of confirming, did they get the understanding that I want them to have around this or not? This is very different than I know I've like fallen into the trap in the past of, all right, so blah, 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 blah. Are we good? Or like, like, is that doable? How does that sound? Even like, yeah, it sounds good. Be like, awesome. Whew, that's the thing I wanted to hear. And then like 10 minutes later, I realized, oh no, they might not be on the same wavelength as me. We might still have some differences. So truly, I need to like have them summarize something back, or like what actions do you plan on taking based on the things that we've talked about? That's another way I could confirm, are we moving in the same direction or not? Are we on the same page?
And that's an important piece around that confirmation, right? When we talk about being clear, curious, and connected, what we're really talking about is how the other person is experiencing you. So we
Mhm.
actually often build into this, like, how will we know that the other person has experienced us as clear, right? How will we know that that we've been curious? And it, because you're checking on it, right? You want to, when you get into the conversation, you want to make sure that you've gotten to that right spot rather than
Mhm.
gone, I walked through my plan and I'm done now. I hope it worked.
Right? Like, good meeting.
because we find that, working through, again, being specific. What are the words you're going to use? I'm going to say this. I'm going to ask this. I know that going in, particularly when it's something that it might be hard for me to
Mhm.
say. I might need to practice making my mouth make those words. In order, because I'm not used to it, right? Often
Right.
that's what makes it hard. And so then being able to go, okay, when we get into the conversation, recognize that it will not just go according to plan, but
Mhm.
that by planning it out, I have a better chance of actually landing closer to that goal than I would have if I didn't.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can download our blueprints at helpingimprove.com/blueprints. And it looks like this. It's a simple one-page worksheet in the upper right. Start off. What are your goals for the conversation? What are you hoping to achieve? What do you want to be true by the end? And then thinking about, like, where are you likely to struggle to be clear? Like, how are you going to know if you've accomplished that or not? How will you know if you've been curious? How will you know if you've been connected? And then work through your what do you do, say, ask. So in the time that we've talked about, answering these questions and how they get used, you could download this and again, spend about 15, 20 minutes. And that's a lot of prep time compared to what we saw in the class. Even in class, we give people maybe 5 minutes. And the 5 minutes makes a difference on how they are able to start a tough conversation. So you can download this, use it for any tough conversation that you have, and be on a better trajectory with that than you might otherwise be.
And like Allison said, at the beginning, this is something that it's not just something that we give to our students, right? This is something we use. I used this for something yesterday because
Yeah.
I recognized there was a conversation I was avoiding, and it helped me to go through this and kind of go, ooh, where am I likely to come off as? I recognized as I sort of drafted out what it was that I wanted to say, that I probably was being, I wasn't being curious enough, and I wasn't sure I was
Mhm.
being connected enough. And so I could figure that out, and I could go, oh, okay, cool. I I might come off as a little harsh here. Let's make sure I'm actually staying in it with this other person. And then the conversation actually went really well because I thought about what could have gone wrong, and I was ready for things that could have come up. And so I was prepared, and that made it much more likely that I'm going to have those difficult conversations in the future, because now I've had the experience of, I've prepared for it, and
Mhm.
my fears about it didn't come to reality, which means that I'm much more likely to go, oh, okay, this is a little difficult, but if I spend a few minutes just getting clearer about what it is that I need to
Mhm.
say, and things like that, I can do this. And ultimately that's what we want for
Yeah.
managers, because when you're able to do that, when you're able to lean in and have more of, and have more skillful versions of the difficult conversations you're avoiding right now, you get better results from yourself, from your people. You're able to have more productive interactions that we talk about. So we think it's a really simple but powerful tool.
Yeah, and we would love to hear from you if you download this and try it. How does it go? And certainly, if you have any questions, reach out to us through our website. We'd love to talk with you more and help you become a more effective manager wherever you are. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.